Okay everyone, so in this video I just want to explore the new Unity input system. I haven't really used that in the project that I work on, which is Status Quest, and I just want to explore. So I have here the tile sprite, or a sprite sheet that I used for the game that we made in our team, in home team, which is Robo Explorer. This is a game that I led, and I just want to explore how to work with creating a game here. So let's start to first slice this, and let's see, we should now have saved that, and then I can now drag our player here, and we can see if I press F, there's that robo robot. And I also want to use this object brick. We have that there. Let me just go get that also. And I'm just going to go to the main camera. Perhaps let's have some sort of just see. Okay, so we do have that color there. Perhaps some orange color then. Let's have at least 3. Duplicate, duplicate. And let's have those 3 objects here. And we just want to explore the new input system. Let's start to work on that. Now that we have some of the objects here, we would want to have this player to utilize the new input system. So we can go to the package manager. Let's look for input system in the Unity registry. Let's see if we have the input system here. Unity input system. And you see it's not yet installed. So let's try to install this. Okay, we can see that it's done, and it tells us that we need to restart the editor. So let's click yes. And let's try to save the changes. So now we can see that the packages that we have here, we should have that input system. Let me just add some component here, like the box collider 2D. Let's also have a rigid body. Let's have a rigid body 2D. Let's try to, let's see, if I try to press on play, this should allow us to, our player to go down. I think we also need to have some box collider here 2D, and we want to select think. Same here. Let's try to give all of this a box collider 2D. Then let's try to create a layer that we'll call ground. Okay, so now this all should have let's try to select all of those bricks. Let's give them a value of ground layer. Then let's first have to go back here, and let me just rename this to layer. And let's try to go add a new component, which is going to be the player input. And we now have that player input system. Then let's start to create actions, and let me just go, let's say I'm going to call this player, and that should be creating a icon like that on our assets folder. So we do have some default values already set up for us, like the move. We have the WASD with some key bindings, and so we do have some action maps already here. So let's try to add one more here. We won't be using the fire and the look here, but we can try to add another one. So let's go on top of here, and let's add a jump binding. Let's have to go here and let's try to add a gamepad. Then let's try to look for gamepad. Let's use button south. Let's add one more. Add a binding, and let's call that for keyboard and mouse. Then we can try to go look for a binding for the spacebar. Let's decide to click on that. Let's try to save this asset and close it. Let's go attach this to our player. So we have our input action. So let's try to go and put this to our actions. I think that automatically got added there. Let's try to go and let's go to the behavior. Let's invoke some of the methods that we will be creating through script. Let's also set up a empty. Then let's have a player ground check here. Let's try to move that at least here at the bottom section of our player. Now let's try to create a new folder. Let's try to call this scripts. Of course, we also want to have all of those in their respective folders, but for the meantime, let's create a C# that we will try to call player movement. I'm just going to call it controller. Then let's attach that to our player as a new component. Scroll down, just going to attach that here. Let's try to open that up. Let's go use the Unity engine that input system, and let's try to have a public rigid body 2D player RB, and in here we're just creating a custom variable from where we can try to reference that. Let's have a public transform, and you would see these are built in, and this is the custom name that I've used for the rigid body to reference the rigid body of the player. And we could have here the player round check that we just created also. So let's try to add some headers here. Just to clean this up, header, then we can put some rigid player information. This is just for us to be able to have some sort of a container. If I can type parentheses correctly, and that should be appearing in here. So if we try to load this, we should be able to see in our script that we have player information. That will be allowing us to have a little bit of organizing our variable declarations. So let's try to add also another header that we will be using for movement variables. And in here, I want to have a... Why are we having a problem here? Ah, that's because we haven't set some... Let's try to first see. Let's see, we have that horizontal. Let's have a speed. But I think we won't be seeing this because we're using some movement speed. Let's give this a value of 5F. Private float jumping power or jump force, I think much. Let's have a 15F. And I want to serialize this. Serialized field. Just so that we can see that on the inspector. So because if we don't have the serialized field, this will not be appearing, right? Let's also have that header. Movement variables. Let's check what that will look like. Okay, so we can have some testing and we're organizing our values here. And we can also have some of the other values serialized like that, just to make sure that we'll be able to see the headers for the movement variables. Let's add one more. And I think I accidentally click on something. So let's have flip or flip right. And that should be also appearing in our that didn't seem to appear. I think that should not be float, that should be bold. Okay, now let's try to go work with creating some functions, function declarations that we will be invoking later on. Just to organize our code here, I'm going to add some comments. Let's just try to create our first function here, which is going to be a public void that we will be invoking, and we'll call this player movement. And let's have a in here, let's try to have the reference to the horizontal variable, and then let's have a context that read value vector 2, and we're going to invoke that dot x, and we can try to add here input action dot callback context. I think that's not the correct one. Should just be camel case or Pascal case. And let's have here context. I think this should be, this is not working. Why is that? That's because we're using read value. So we're accessing in this callback context parameter, the context property. With the use of the dot syntax, we're able to access this read value, and this vector 2, that will be representing some of the positions in Unity, especially for 2D vectors points. And let's also have some functions that we will be using, like public void player flip, and let's start to have that. Let's start to reference the flip right value, and we're checking is flip right is not flip right. Let's use vector 3 local scale, and we want to transform the local scale, and we want to target the local scale x. We want to set that to negative f value, and transform that local scale. So this is going to be a way for us to set or get the scale. This declaration that we're doing here, we want to have a game object relative to its parent space, and if there's no parent, then the game object is going to be scaled relative to itself space. Let's also go and try to create a private pool is grounded, and let's have a return statement here that from where we will be using the physics 2D that overlap circle, and we want to check the player ground check dot position 0.2 f value, and we want to have that. We want to have a variable here that we'll call public layer mask layer ground layer, or let's just call this ground layer. Let's use that. Let's go down here, and now let's start to go to our update. We can actually delete this and then go here. Let's reference the player RB rigid body, and then target the velocity, and let's have a new vector 2. Let's give that horizontal times movement speed player RB dot velocity dot y, and we want to check if we will be flipping. So let's have flip right and horizontal. Let's greater than 0f. We want to invoke our function player flip, and else if we want to have the flip right and horizontal less than 0f, we want to go and then do another flip. I think this is a lot easier to read if we have it in separate lines. Now let's have to create we have is grounded, we're flipping the player, we have the player movement for the horizontal value, and I think we need to make sure that there's, let's also have a public void jump. Let's just say player jump, and in here we want to check for input action that callback. I just get used to camel case. So let's have an if context dot performed and is grounded. We want to check if the player RB rigid body dot velocity. I'm just saying player just to make sure that I won't get confused if it's a player or an enemy that I'm working on. Jump forced. Let's use that intelligence there. Then in here, let's have another if. I'm just going to copy paste here. And let's say if we cancel this, it's like accessing those methods. I'm not sure if this is a method or I think this is a Boolean value. And if we have some background in programming, we would know that these are properties or methods that we're accessing there. And in here, we want to check for player RB. And we want to check for the velocity of the player's rigid body dot y 0f is greater than 0f. Then we want to add the player velocity, new vector, player RB dot x. And we want to add some velocity to the player RB dot velocity dot y times 0.8f. Let's start the first test. How that's going to work. Now let's go to Unity. If I didn't make any mistakes, we should be able to go to our rigid body and reference that here. So we'll have to drag that to our script rigid body. We also need to player ground check. Now let's try to see our input settings. Let's look at the invent, and we do have our player here. We want to call on the player controller. Let me just drag that. First our, if I can drag it correctly. Let's first try to have a move. I think we can try to, nope, we cannot minimize that. Just, let's minimize some of this just to clean some things out. And we can try to drag player controller up here. And we want to call our player controller. Where's our player movement? So to look for our jump. Let's drag our player controller, player jump. And let's just go back down here. I think we don't have a ground layer yet, so let's set that to ground and let's see if we were able to make this work correctly. And we do see that we have our player jumping, but the player's a little bit jumping too high. But we do have the player jumping. And I think we can try to reduce this to 10. And I think we have to, let's go to our transform, sprite, rigid body. We have to set that to some constraint. Rotation should be gone. Let me just set that rotation. And let's see. That should be allowing us to move. But I think it's too, and when you're in this play mode, you can adjust the values and that won't be, you'll see we now have adjusted the values, and we do have the ability to jump. And I think the flip right, is it working correctly? Let's pause and then go to our game view, maximize play, and let's see if that is working correctly. Okay, so we do have the player flipping right and left, as we can see here. But of course we need to have a sprite that will be much more indicating the direction correctly, right? I think this sprite is facing to the right when we first try to play it, and now it's facing to the left, facing to the right, facing to the left, and you see the values were now change. So I think we have to change this here to 4 and play it, and let's see. And I think the player now does move, and that's the very basic of an input system, player input system, using the new input system of Unity.